last year, the Hudson Historical Society talked about Louis DeWart Apsley, whose mansion is just around the corner here from where we are. An easy walk, as a matter of fact, if it were that kind of a day or evening. So anyway, for this year, when Lynn mentioned that there would be another component added and that clothing would be acceptable, we looked in a trunk that we had from the Apsley family. It was given to the Hudson Historical Society by Harriman Reardon, who had been an heir to the Apsleys. They themselves did not have any children. They had one child who died young, and so by the time they both passed away, there were no immediate family members, and Harriman Reardon was a nephew. So he got the trunk with the clothing and various other items and gave it to the Hudson Historical Society. So what we have is an item of clothing worn by the first Mrs. Apsley, and here is a picture of her with her niece. And there's no date on it, but it would have been probably around 1900, I would say. We do have another photograph that's really good too of her, and then one of Mrs. Apsley and Congressman Apsley on a gondola in Venice. So, and that has a special significance that I can also add to whatever we want to exhibit. So I have a skirt here and shoes, but first I'll read a little bit about her. Laura Marguerite Remington was the youngest daughter of Captain John Remington, a descendant of an old Philadelphia family. Also on her mother's side, a descendant of Richard Swain, who came from England to New England about 1640. She was much loved and had many admirers, including Mr. Apsley. They were married in Pennsylvania in 1873. They had one son, William George, who fell victim to diphtheria at the age of 6 and died in 1880. The esteemed wife of our congressman took an active part in Washington society. At their elegant home on Q Street, Mrs. Apsley was always the gracious hostess, as they frequently entertained officials and visiting dignitaries from around the world. He and his wife traveled extensively, visiting many countries in Europe, as well as the Holy Land, Bermuda, and Jamaica, bringing back treasures which adorned their home. On an Italian trip, they visited Venice and had their picture taken on a gondola, which we had. Mr. Apsley was a very patriotic man and had an American flag made up, and it was placed on the end of the gondola for all to see where he came from. And apparently it was the first time that an American flag had been flown on an Italian gondola. Mrs. Apsley passed away in March of 1914, and Mr. Apsley eventually remarried. And then Barbara just came tonight to give me some additional information that she found. So she checked this out, and Mrs. Apsley, the wife of the Honorable Louis DeWart Apsley, the able representative of the 4th Massachusetts District, was born in Philadelphia. She was the youngest daughter of the late Captain John Remington. Mrs. Apsley bore the euphonious name of Laura Marguerite Remington. Her early life was spent in Philadelphia. She was much loved by a large coterie of friends and had many admirers, among whom was Louis DeWart Apsley, then an active young businessman in Philadelphia. Their marriage occurred in that city in 1873, where they resided for some years and finally located in Hudson, Mass. in 1883. Mr. Apsley is known to a large and influential circle as a successful man in business and politics. He was president of the Hudson Board of Trade, director of the Hudson National Bank, and prominently connected with other enterprises in his state. He was elected to be the 53rd and 54th Congress, and during the winter season, they resided in a commodious Washington residence where they entertained munificently. Representative and Mrs. Apsley were one of the most striking couples of official circles. Graceful of figure, fair and blue-eyed, Mrs. Apsley is the opposite of her stalwart, robust husband, with his massive black hair and black eyes. Her beauty would attract many admirers anywhere. The poet says that unto each life some rain must fall, and into their happy home came some sorrow, the death of their only son, William George, in 1880. So we have a picture, we have a parasol that belonged to her, and a pink skirt with a black jacket. She looked like she was kind of a, when we look at the picture, she.
Can I be Vanna White and hold it up?
Very good.
Mind if they? Oh, I love this jacket. Ooh, she was tiny. They made people tiny back in those days. They didn't have genetically modified food. Beautiful. It's heavy too. It's really. Would you say?
You're probably wearing a corset.
Yeah, that's true too. And fainting all the while.
The
Oh.
white and gold pumps.
Size off.
Oh, glove, thank you, because I could see I have two on. Thank you.
I'll bring them around. They're beautiful. And they're soft too, like doeskin or something.
So is the skirt, is that made out of silk?
It's hard to tell. I think perhaps it is, but I don't think that there's anything that says what it is. That I can put it up on. Let's see, and it's all lined. See, there's a lining in there. And it's in fairly good condition compared to some of the other items we have. Then we have a set of brushes that she used, combs and brushes, and some of the hats that Congressman Apsley had. And a few other items in there, but at some point it was hard to tell what was really Mrs. Apsley's and what might have been Mrs. Ridden's, because there were things from both of them. Yes?